Hi, I'm David Crow. Thank you for tuning in to episode 220 of my weekly radio show, The Infectious Myth. Email me at david.crow@theinfectiousmyth.com. That's Crow with an E. Join the discussion and like us at facebook.com/theinfectiousmyth. Follow on Twitter and Instagram at infectiousmyth. Listen Tuesdays at 2 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time on prn.fm or subscribe to the podcast. You can listen to any of the last 5 episodes over the phone by dialing the U.S. number 701-719-0990. PRN.FM has voicemail. You can call 862-800-6805. Leave a message for the show, your name, and indicate that the question is for the Infectious Myth. Remember that long-distance charges may apply to either of these numbers. Let me know that you're a listener. Send me a message letting me know how you stay in touch with the show, what you like about it. If you include your mailing address, I'll send you a little thank you gift, one of the bookmarks I make by hand using my own photographs. We have a really great interview this week on a very important subject, false convictions in the U.S. justice system. Let's listen. Some shows may shy away from guests who've been in jail, but sometimes it's a badge of honor. Jeff Deskovic spent years in jail for the rape and murder of a 15-year-old girl, a crime that the then 17-year-old did not commit. Since being released after spending 16 years in jail, he has both studied for a law degree and worked to exonerate some of the approximately 120,000 other wrongly convicted people believed to be in U.S. jails. Welcome to the show, Jeff, and congratulations on your recent graduation.
Thank you for having me. So excited about today's interview.
Yes. Well, this is a very important subject that we've covered before, and in your case, you're both a victim of a false conviction and also somebody who's helping the many other people in that place. So maybe you can start by describing the crime that started you on this journey, really, many years ago.
Sure. In 1990, I was a student in Peekskill High School, and a classmate of mine, Angela Correa, who was a 15-year-old immigrant from Colombia, who had been in the country for about a year and a half, living a very sheltered life. Her body was found murdered, and her body was found naked from the waist down. She had been murdered and raped, and that was the crime.
Like, one of the strangest things about this was that the police saw that you were quite emotional at the various services for her, and they interpreted that as feelings of guilt. What was your relationship with this girl before her tragic rape and murder?
She was a classmate in 2 of my classes as a freshman, 1 as a sophomore. That was it. I knew her name. She knew mine. That was the extent of it. We were not friends. Certainly, it wasn't my girlfriend or anyone I was dating. I had the emotional reaction because, number one, I was kind of a sensitive kid, number one. And maybe as part of that, just a further elaboration is that this was really my first brush with death. I mean, I thought that was something that happened after you have like a really full life and you're like really, really old and sick. And then, in addition to that, I had an opportunity to. I met her sister and her parents. They were offering like coffee and cookies after one of the wakes at the apartment, and they had actually left her bedroom like preserved as it was.
Right.
So, and there was pictures of her in there. And I think that further kind of brought it home.
Right.
So it all touched me, and the end result of it all was, as you said, the police interpreted that as a sign of guilt, like I was sorry for what I had done. That was a factor, and another factor was that the police claimed that they interviewed a lot of students from the high school, and that some of those students told them that they might want to talk to me because I was quiet, I was to myself. So that was how I got on their radar. So I guess like the underlying theory to that is that people who are like on the fringes of society that are introverts, not extroverts, who don't participate in sports and are not with the in crowd, that they commit heinous crimes. That's the philosophy.
I guess I was lucky when I was in high school, because that kind of describes me at that point to a T. Introverted, not on the inside crowd. It's easier than we think to get dragged into something like this, because if this crime had never happened, your life would have taken a completely different turn. you would have never gone to jail, and now you would not be working for other wrongly incarcerated people.
Exactly right. Well, I make sense out of everything that happened to me by believing that, this is the work I'm meant to do in the world. This is my mission in life. And that's how I understand why what happened to me did in a more kaleidoscopic type of way.
It seems incredible that, I can see, a policeman has a hunch, this guy's behaving strangely, fine. But there should be some evidence. So, I mean, what did they use in court to convince the jury that you were guilty?
A coerced false confession. I'd like to elaborate on the circumstances around that.
Yeah, that's false confessions. I don't know if you know James Trainham, but I interviewed him.
I know Jim Trainham. I've been at a number of events, and I was a columnist for 5 years after I was exonerated. Not to jump ahead, but I wrote an article about Jim. And when I was a columnist for the Westchester Guardian, it was called "A Cop's Cop." Like a man's a cop's cop. Jim is awesome.
Yes. Anyway, so describe this false confession, how it arose, and what impact it had on your case.
Sure. So before I was a teenager, the career that I wanted to have when I grew up was actually to be a cop. So for about 6 weeks, the police played this cat and mouse game with me, in which half the time they would talk to me as if I was a suspect, and the other half the time they would pretend like they needed my help to solve the crime. They would say things like, the kids won't talk freely around us, but they will around you. They would ask me, they would tell me stop in from time to time. They made me the center of attention. They made me feel important. They would ask me opinion questions and congratulate me on my opinions being correct. So the theme of Jeff as the junior detective helper, they were able to pull the wool over my eyes because of my age. I was 16, but also because of the fact that I wanted to be a cop when I was a kid. This was like an unexpected early opportunity to do this police work.
Right.
So eventually they got me to agree to take a polygraph test, also known as a lie detector test. They told me that there was some new information that they had gotten into their file. They wanted to share that with me, and that would allow me to be more helpful to them. But of course, to have access to that, I would have to pass the polygraph test.
Right.
So the next day, I agreed to take the test based upon that lie. And so the next day, instead of going to the police station, instead of going to the high school, I went to the police station because it was a school day. My mother and grandmother, who I lived with, thought I was in school, so they didn't call around looking for me. They had no idea anything was amiss.
Right.
I thought I was going to be polygraphed at Peekskill Police Station because I had heard through the rumor mill that other people had been polygraphed there.
Right.
But instead, they drove me to the town of Brewster, which is in Putnam County. So they took me across county lines 40 minutes away via car. So now I don't know where I'm at, and I have no independent way of getting back. So there were 3 cops that came there with me, but then there was also the polygraphist, former Putnam County Sheriff's investigator Daniel Stevens, who was dressed as a civilian. He was pretending not to be a cop, so I never learned until later that he was a police officer. They didn't give me anything to eat at the time I was there. I didn't have an attorney present. They gave me a 4-page brochure outlining on how the polygraph worked, but it had a lot of big words in it that I didn't understand. But then I pushed past my own concern by thinking, well, what difference does it make? I'm here to help the police. Let's just get on with it.
Right.
So then they put me in a small room, and the polygraphist gives me countless cups of coffee. I think it was 6 or 7 cups. I mean, it seems pretty clear that he did that in order to get me nervous.
Right.
And after that, So after that, he strapped me to this polygraph machine. So now I can barely get up. I certainly can't move around. And then he launches into his 3rd-degree tactics. So he invades my personal space. He raises his voice at me. He keeps asking me the same questions over and over again. As each hour is going past, he's getting like more and more ferocious, and I'm really frightened. I mean, particularly so because my father was never involved in my life in any aspect. I never met
Right.
him growing
Mm-hmm.
up. So I wasn't used to talking with grown men. I was afraid, really, in a lot
Right.
of ways of
Mm-hmm.
grown
Mm-hmm.
men. And so the way he was carrying on, that, that amplified that fear. And, and just to take a half step back, because my father was never involved in my life, that intersected with the good cop, bad cop routine that the cops had been using on me,
Right.
pretending to be a friend, but then another one being more aggressive. So I began to look at the officer who was pretending to be my friend as a positive adult male role model.
Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So anyway, not to belabor this much, but uh, he kept up his scare tactics for about 6.5 to 7 hours.
Six and
I,
a half to 7 hours. Like this is a polygraph is supposed to be, a few minutes where they ask you some questions, you're hooked up, and then they analyze it. It might be a lot of BS, but it's not supposed to be 6 or 7 hours, as far as I know.
No, it's certainly not. No, the maximum amount of time per a polygraph expert that we got an affidavit from in the course of the lawsuit, he said that the maximum amount of time they could see is like 3 hours, and even that would be extreme. And here in my case, it was more than double. So that was an abuse that expert considered to be shocking. And in fact, the opinion was offered that this was not a polygraph at all, but in fact was an interrogation masked as a
Right.
polygraph.
Well, I actually
So
interviewed an expert on polygraphs, and he said that they generally can't be taken into court unless the person who took the polygraph agrees. But the police like them because they can intimidate people to confess. Of course, in some
right.
cases, the confession is not
Yeah,
a true confession.
right, exactly. That's the problem with it, is that it's coercive, and sometimes the confessions that it yields will be false confessions, and that's also why they're supposed to, like for the Arthur method, for example, they're supposed to audio or videotape it as a counterbalance measure against false confessions. But this polygraphist didn't do that. He didn't video it. He didn't audio it. So towards the end of the interrogation, he said to me, I guess he was exasperated by that point because he had been unable to get me to confess. He said, what do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the test results that you did. We just want you to verbally confirm it. So when he said that to me, that really shot my fear through the roof.
Right.
And it was at that moment that the officer who had been pretending to be my friend, he came in the room and told me that the officers were going to harm me, but that he had been holding them off but couldn't do so any longer. Look, you got to help yourself here. Just tell them what they want and they'll stop what they're doing. You can go home afterwards. You're not going to be arrested. So being young, naive, frightened, overwhelmed emotionally and psychologically, I was in fear of my life because the fact that I didn't know where I was and that
Mm-hmm.
nobody else loomed large, but then also the way that they were conducting themselves, I thought I might not make it out of there alive. And then there was the push-pull dynamic, of because on one hand, the possibility of harm had been thrown in the air, but then on the other, he threw me this false life preserver,
Right.
and I latched onto that. And I decided to make up a story based upon information that they gave me in the course of that interrogation and the 6 weeks run up to that, and also items in the newspaper. But I spoke faster than I could make things up, and then I felt even more overwhelmed from that. And so the end result of it all is that I collapsed on the floor into a fetal position, and I was crying uncontrollably.
And they would interpret that, of course, because you finally let out your guilt.
Correct.
Not that they'd abused you for 6 hours and they'd finally broken you.
Right, exactly. And, obviously, needless to say, despite their promise to the contrary, I was in fact arrested. So I was charged with
Obviously.
right. So that was the evidence. That was the only evidence they had in court. There was a DNA test that showed that semen found on the victim didn't match me, but then they had an answer for that. They got the medical examiner to commit fraud and got him. The prosecutor did, getting him to claim, "Oh, I found medical evidence that I forgot to document 6 months ago when I did the autopsy that showed that Angela Correa had been sexually active." And so the DNA not matching Deskovic doesn't mean he's innocent. that that could have come from a consensual sex partner that she slept with close enough to the murder and rape, so as to explain away the DNA.
Did they try to find out where that DNA came from?
No.
You'd think if she had a boyfriend that she was having sex with before the events that they would find the boyfriend, right?
Right. Well, I want to share about that. When the DNA results didn't match me, I mean, I later learned, like during the course of the litigation and the lawsuit, that the Peekskill Police Department went back out into the field and they interviewed about 17 people who knew the victim in one way, in one capacity or another. And all of them told the police that she was not dating, she had no boyfriend, there was no consensual sex.
Right.
But the police purposely did not document those interviews, so that information was not turned over to my lawyers.
They needed to believe that, and I guess the jury bought it. I mean, if they had been able to identify the person, and maybe they could have if they'd wanted to, then obviously the testimony of that person, even if it was a boyfriend, would be critical. Like, when did he have sex with the girl, et cetera, et cetera. That's just crazy.
Right. But they never bothered to do that, though. That's the thing. They named somebody by name that they claimed had slept with the victim. They named another high school student. But the issue is that they never had a DNA test performed on him. They never called him as a witness to verbally confirm that. The prosecutor just made the unsupported argument to the jury.
So yeah, I mean, that just also seems bizarre. That's a pretty critical factor, and to not have the witness actually state that in court seems crazy. So once you were convicted, let's go to how you started to try to advocate for your own release. Well, first of all, how did your family and friends react to your conviction? I mean, did you feel that they believed this? Or did you have supporters on the outside who said, no, there's no way this is true?
Well, the bulk of my extended family believed in my innocence. There were a couple of people that did not. One uncle had been a marshal in Yonkers, which is a law enforcement position, and he spoke to the Peekskill police, and as I understand it, they convinced him that I was guilty. So him and his daughter thought that I was guilty, but everybody else believed that I was innocent, but their belief in me didn't translate into them being of any assistance in any way.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of my friends, a couple of my friends believed in me, but the bulk of everyone else that I knew, including the rest of my friends, I mean, they all abandoned me when I was arrested. I mean, but they were kids, and if the cops tell you something, then they, you tend to believe it, especially, and that's amplified by a report that I had confessed.
Yeah, confessions have a great deal of power, right? If the person who's accused says, I did it.
Yeah, there's an 80% conviction rate in cases where somebody has confessed. It's very powerful. Yet it's one of the leading causes of wrongful convictions. It's been the cause of wrongful conviction in 25% of the DNA-proven wrongful convictions, with particularly vulnerable populations being identified by false confession experts as youth and people with mental health issues.
Right. So describe how you started the process of trying to get yourself out of jail. I mean, you like you say, you don't have a lot of support on the outside. You got to do this yourself.
Yes. Well, they gave me a court-appointed lawyer to handle my appeals, but I didn't, having had a bad experience with lawyers at the trial court, I didn't rely on that. So I went to the law library and I learned about the law, and I would send suggestions to the arguments that were pulling up the authorities that were being cited in my behalf. The case law, to try to assess what the strength of the arguments were that my freedom was now being tied to.
Right.
When I lost all of my appeals, I began writing letters looking for help. because once your appeals are over, you're permanently locked out of the courtroom
Yes.
unless you can find some new evidence that wasn't
Mm-hmm.
known, or unless there's some change in the law that's retroactive. So I wasn't going to find any new evidence myself while in a prison cell. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so I wrote letters for about 4 years, trying to get to anyone and anyone I could possibly think of who could help me, either directly or indirectly. I mean, I was trying to get some free legal help because I didn't have any money to hire anybody. Then I went to the parole board, and I got turned down there because I maintained my innocence rather than expressing remorse and taking responsibility.
It's a catch-22. If you truly are
Exactly.
innocent, you go to the parole board, you say you're innocent, well, okay, you're going to stay in jail. It's the guilty ones who can persuade the parole board that they're really sorry who get parole.
Yeah, exactly right. So eventually I wound up in touch with Claudia Whitman, who was an investigator in Colorado and in Maine, and she believed in my case because of the DNA test that didn't match me, and she persuaded me to write the Innocence Project looking for help, and she lobbied them from outside their organization, and she got other respected legal entities to also lobby them.
Right.
I got lucky that an intake worker there, Maggie Taylor, presented my case to the staff attorney. She presented it 3 times after I'd been told no twice.
Right.
And so once they got on board, they convinced the district attorney to allow me to have further testing.
And this was a new district attorney, right?
This is a new district attorney. Yeah, this was District Attorney Janet DiFiore. So the district attorney who was the DA at the time I was convicted was Carl Vagari, but he was replaced by Janine Pirro. So I was not convicted under Pirro, but she took office before my first appeal was decided. So she was the one who kept the ball rolling against me, including blocking me from getting, several times she blocked me from getting further testing. And, she's the one who fought she beat me in 7 appeals is what it was. So the new DA allowed me to get further testing without having to litigate over it.
Mm-hmm.
And they took the crime scene DNA, which already didn't match me, and they ran it through the DNA data bank. And it matched which hadn't been available previously, and it matched the actual perpetrator who had killed a second victim just 3.5 years later after killing the victim in my case, because he was left free while I was doing time with his crime.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important point, is that when the wrong person is sent to jail, then the actual criminal is left on the street. And in this case, we know that he killed again, which almost certainly, if he had been convicted of your case, that he would have been in jail and would not have killed the second time.
Yeah, correct. Exactly. Well, that's why, although when you send the wrong person to prison, you not just send them, but send their family. But then in that larger sense, as you're saying, it's really a public safety issue. In a sense, you're leaving the community in danger from the actual perpetrator.
There was another famous person who played a role in your case. I guess everybody knows Judge Janine Pirro, who's now a star on television. Sonia Sotomayor is now a Supreme Court justice. So what role did she play in preventing one of your appeals or some litigation you were undergoing?
Yes. So I lost in federal court because the court clerk gave my lawyer the wrong information pertaining to the filing procedure. And as a result of that, the briefs arrived 4 days too late. And District Attorney Pirro's office urged the federal court to just rule that I was late without even getting to the merits of my issues, to just dismiss my case.
Right. So
that was the federal court below. Sotomayor comes in the picture because I challenged that ruling in front of her, and her colleague, Judge Rosemary Pooler, they upheld the lower court decision, and then they denied my re-argument motion when my lawyer tried to re-argue the decision in front of them and requesting that all of their colleagues hear the case and make a ruling on it.
Yes, but I mean, it was not your mistake. It was the court clerk's mistake. But Anyway, so Sonia Sotomayor, who's seen as a progressive judge, ruled against you and
Yes.
denied the brief because it was too late.
Well, the court under her did, but she upheld that ruling. She upheld it. She said what they did below was okay by her. So I don't see her as progressive. I know that that's the popular view, but not to digress, but there's other wrongful conviction cases that have come in front of her where she didn't do the right thing. There's plenty of cases on that.
I mean, I guess that's a question I have. Is it seems to me that the system kind of tries to protect its own decisions. Like, it's embarrassing when somebody like you is in jail for 16 years and then they have to admit that you were never guilty. It's also expensive because you received a pretty large settlement. I mean, what do you think are the motivations for the justice system to be so reluctant to reconsider cases where there seems to be some pretty good evidence that it was a miscarriage of justice?
I think that there's a concern about not wanting to have to undo all the time and effort that went into cases. I think there's not wanting to admit the error. I think that there's too much collegiality between the judges and prosecutors. Too many judges used to be prosecutors. Mm-hmm. So that's a big part of it. And then there's a couple of tensions within the justice system. I mean, competing concepts. So there's one of them is finality of conviction versus accuracy. And what that means is it's the idea that, look, you had your day in court again. You had your day in court. When is this going to end? When is this going to ever be finished? Like, you lost, you're guilty. That's it. So there's that need for finality. There's that idea. But on the other hand, what good is a final conclusion if it's not accurate? So that's part of it. And the next concept is proceduralism versus substantive justice. And what I mean by that is the courts tend to emphasize like the process. Like, for example, in my case, a good example of that is, why does it matter? If my petition arrived 4 days late, who cares? If it's late, take it up with the lawyer who filed the petition wrong. Find out for them late. Find out why did they file it wrong? Maybe they should be censored. Maybe they should pay a fine. Maybe there's something else should happen, right? Or maybe there's a legitimate excuse. But that inquiry should be as against the lawyer. The answer shouldn't be it's as against the defendant and the defendant's case is now going to be dismissed. That's a very brutal thing to do. That's totally inconsistent with justice. So proceduralism, it's like the process is what's important. How we get, not the result, but how we got there. So that's proceduralism. And then substantive justice. Like, for example, in my case, I should have won. I was innocent. There was evidence of my innocence, this DNA test that didn't match. And that was what was important, not the fact that I was late. Right. But courts value form over substance. And that's another problem. And so those reasons are there. And there's this tendency too, I think, to just rubber stamp deny appeals, because I think that the caseload is so large, it's so crushing, and then they come to be jaded, like everybody's guilty. All these legal arguments is just a way for somebody who committed a crime in order to try to get away with it. They're just throwing crap on the wall, and they're just seeing if something sticks, right? That's what the judges think. The judges think that. I don't believe that. I do think that happens some, but I don't think that that's the case all the time. But in any event, if you're a judge, you signed up for that, okay? You decided to be a judge. So it's your job to painstakingly evaluate each and every claim that's raised. And you separate the BS from the legit arguments, and that means you take your time and evaluate each claim and make the right ruling. Otherwise, you're gonna harm innocent people. And that's what happened to me.
Right. And I guess that means that this is somewhat related to the over criminalization of the United States. I mean, they've deluged the system in the United States with people with personal small quantities of drugs, or people who shoplifted, who are facing life in prison.
If we decriminalized the things that could safely be decriminalized, then there's no question that the caseload that courts have to deal with would be lessened, and that includes that includes appeals. Appeals is part of that. As somebody, let me just share a couple numbers, okay? The average length of wrongful imprisonment is 14 years, and that's all because of these factors that I'm laying out. And then on top of that, it's typical that by the time somebody is exonerated, they've long since exhausted their appeals. The bulk of these wrongful conviction cases, including mine, are not being caught and corrected in the normal course of the appellate process. They're being corrected through a post-conviction motion because the appeals were all exhausted, and the wrongfully convicted people got lucky that some evidence of innocence was discovered after. I'm saying, sadly, what often determines whether or not somebody is going to be able to get justice is not whether or not they have the facts on their side as substantiated by evidence, and not whether, but it's instead turns on whether or not the judge is going to give an open-minded, fair and objective decision, whether they're going to fairly consider the issues, or are they going to just instinctively rubber stamp deny.
Right. Now, in your case, was it pretty much game over when it was clear that the DNA now belonged to an identified person as opposed to just not belonging to you? That was it.
That was game, set, and match right then and there. Yes.
Right.
And I want to add that the person that it matched then confessed.
Oh, okay.
Once the DNA matched the actual perpetrator, the authorities confronted him with that evidence, and he confessed. And he also confessed to a reporter on videotape in a prison interview. So just so everybody's clear, okay, no coerced confession there, no false confession there. That confession was given to a reporter on camera, apart and aside from authorities, and the DNA matched him. It confirmed it. So that's not a false confession.
Right.
That's
and
a true confession.
Presumably, this person was probably not facing any more jail time because they're probably already facing life in jail.
No, he was. He was.
He was?
So he was doing, So he was, Stephen Cunningham was serving 20 to life for killing the second victim, a school teacher, Patricia Morrison, in Peekskill, who had a couple of kids. So by the time he got arrested for killing the victim in my case, he had already been in prison for 13 years, so he was going to see the parole board in 7 years. But then when he got caught for this crime, they added 20 years to his sentence.
Right. So he's never getting out now.
I believe he's never going to get out. No, he's never going to get out. He killed two people. As I understand it, he's got several drug convictions on top of that. So.
Yes.
I don't believe he'll ever actually get out. No, the odds of that are very slim.
So when did you decide to go to law school? Right away, or?
Well, yeah, right away I decided that I wanted to. Sure, but wait a minute. Let me take a half step back.
Yeah.
When I got out, I was 32. By that point, I had the GED that I got while I was in prison. I got the associate's degree also while I was in prison, and I completed a year of further study towards the bachelor's degree. And at that point, the funding for college education for prisoners was cut. So all the colleges left. So I wasn't able to finish my bachelor's degree. So when I got out, I was offered a scholarship by Mercy College to finish the bachelor's degree. And so that was kind of an intervention. So when I was initially released, I wasn't thinking about law school because I thought I was too old to go to college. I thought that was a younger person's thing, but I wasn't doing anything else, and so I went back to school. I took advantage of that scholarship, and that's when I decided that I wanted to go to law school. And I tried to get in, but my LSAT score, the entrance exam to law school, I didn't do well on that. And so 11 law schools rejected me.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point after that, because I was in a dead-end job, I wasn't making very much and I hated what I was doing. So I decided that I was going to go back to school. I was going to just get a master's degree, which I did from the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, which included a master's thesis on wrongful conviction. And so from there, I decided not too long after that, I mean, I was debating going to law school again. But I had done a number of CLEs, that's continuing legal education,
Uh-huh.
instruction for lawyers and judges, and I had done a bunch. I had done about 4 of them for judges, and I was chit chatting on various wrongful conviction topics. And I was chit chatting in the hallway one day with Judge Hines Radix, and she said to me, why don't you go to law school and be a lawyer? I mean, you know certain areas of the law better than judges, better than lawyers, and actually better than some judges. That's why we have you come here and speak to us about different wrongful conviction topics. I mean, just go to law school and get the certification. And so that kind of ended the debate in my own mind that I want to spend 3 hard years in law school. It's nothing to do with my nonprofit that Jeffrey started using some of the compensation money. But that kind of ended the debate in my mind, and I decided to go and do it.
So did you have to take the LSAT again, or?
I did. I did have to take the LSAT again because by that point, my score was considered to be stale. And I took it again, and I actually did a little bit worse. I did a little bit worse on it this time than I did before. I mean, I'm just not a good standardized test taker. I can take regular tests. Okay, but anyway, long story, it was a changed environment now. At this point, schools were more liberal in considering the total candidate, like their undergrad, their GPA and what their background was, what they wanted to do with the degree. And then also, frankly, the schools were also hurting somewhat as far as enough incoming students. So I think that the combination of those things, and then plus Professor Gershman, who's considered to be the country's leading expert on prosecutorial misconduct, he really went to bat for me. He struggled hard and mightily for me at Pace Law School to get them, because even they didn't want to let me in. So, they were one of the schools that turned me down when I originally applied, and now I'm applying again. And they had concerns again. But go ahead.
Yeah, once you got in, I mean, you were considerably older than other students, and also you had been incarcerated, and I'm sure a lot of law students have led a pretty sheltered life by comparison. So how did your interactions go with other law students?
Yeah. I mean, I think. Well, I was. It was very. I liked it because I didn't hide my story. I mean, I used to talk about my story in a lot of the classes, and so far as it related to different topics, I used to help organize a lot of wrongful conviction events on the campus, and I was doing media all the time, often at campus, so people knew who I was. So I would say that people were very friendly. They admired me. They considered it to be inspirational. So that aspect of it was good. But on the flip side, when it came to the social aspect of law school, I mean, look, people used to say hello and they would be friendly, but it wasn't the same social interaction that they were having with each other. So I
guess that's natural with being older. I went back to school older, and I mean, I deliberately avoided a lot of social events because I didn't want to pretend that I was 20 again.
Right, but it kept putting back into my face, what happened to me though. I mean, I really regret that part of it because I feel like it would have been a much richer experience socially, with the same social interaction as a student. So kind of feel a pang of regret that my life took the turn that it did, even though, I mean, not a rational thing because it's not a conscious choice I made. I mean, this was something that was done to me. I didn't go off course and now I made a course correction. I did something wrong and I paid for it and now I'm making good. No, this was something wrong done to me from the very beginning. So it doesn't make sense in a way, but I don't know. I guess it's just... You
got to accept it. I mean, you probably wouldn't have gone to law school if your life had continued without this horrendous interruption, right?
Disagree, because I did want to become a lawyer.
Okay.
In my teenage years, I stopped wanting to be a cop, and I decided I
Okay.
wanted to be a lawyer because my mother had a personal injury lawyer, and he had on some nice clothes in the Hitachi case, and
Okay.
he appeared to be pretty well respected. He appeared to be earning a very nice living. So I did want to be a lawyer,
Yeah.
but I did not. It wasn't to do criminal law. It certainly wasn't to free wrongfully convicted people and help them to get compensated. So, and that aspect of what happened to me definitely changed the trajectory of my life in terms of of what I went to law school for and what I intend to use a degree for.
Right. And yeah, so I mean, it seems pretty obvious from your past, from your foundation, that your intention of going to law school was that you could come out and help people better as a
Yes.
lawyer. So can you describe some of the wrongful convictions that you've been involved with? Some of, not that you've been involved in, trying to undo some of the wrongful
Correct.
convictions.
Yeah, sure. So my foundation has freed 7 wrongfully convicted people, and we just won another case a few days ago, Andrew Krivak. So describing a couple of the cases. So one of them was William Lopez, who was in prison for 23 and a half years in a shotgun murder out of Brooklyn.
Yeah.
So Lopez's case, I mean, he had pre-existing lawyers that were with him for 9 years before us, but we joined the team. We were part of the team for like a year, and it was kind of like a building was built, but was missing a section. We helped fill in that section. We did some investigative work. So that case there, it started out as a 2-witness case, but then one of the witnesses could not identify him in court, and so then it became my 1-witness case. And so this one witness, who was present at the when the crime happened, who claimed to recognize him. Well, she had done like 12 vials of crack in the previous 24 hours. She hadn't slept, and the initial description was 2 dark-skinned Panamanians, 6'1", 6'2", and Lopez was a 5'7", light-skinned Puerto Rican, 100 pounds less than the description. So his case kind of leapt off the pages to us, and his lawyers talked him out of calling his 2 alibi witnesses. So his conviction was, so we did some investigative work, including locating another person who was present at the crime scene, but that the police had never identified or apprehended, and that culminated into his winning his case in federal court. Another case was William Hawley, which was a Putnam County case. So recalling that I was taken to Brewster, which is in Putnam County, so kind of a nice extra significance to that, given the geography. So William Hawley spent 8 years and 4 months in prison on an arson case that was actually an electrical fire. And so in that one, we were able to, the Putnam County District Attorney agreed in that he was innocent, and so he was exonerated that way. So those were 2 of the cases.
There are many reasons for false incarceration, poor legal representation, false confessions that you've
misidentification, lying in testimony.
So in these cases, what were the critical errors that were made that resulted in the false conviction?
Yeah, sure. So in the Lopez case, it was prosecutorial misconduct, and it was lying informant / misidentification. So one of that same witness who claimed to be doing the right thing, that she wasn't getting a benefit, even though she was facing her own charges. I mean, she miraculously was released from jail the day after he was convicted. So it's clear that she was in fact given a deal, despite the prosecutorial assertions to the contrary.
Right.
So prosecutorial misconduct, the misidentification, the lying informant, bad lawyering was certainly a factor his lawyers, talked him out of the alibis, and they didn't represent him very well. In the Hawley case, I mean, that was a junk science case. I mean, arson is considered to be like a junk science. I mean, really what it is it's verbal traditions that are passed down from one fire chief to the next, as to these are your signs, this is where your markers are, this is what this means, and what that means. There's nothing scientific about it. It's not replicable. So that had to do.
In that case, how did you overturn the junk science?
There was another fire expert who looked at the evidence and discovered deficient wiring. Who disputed the findings. Yeah.
We've been talking for quite a while. I'd just like to know, like, what are the plans for your foundation in the future? And how can people help if they're interested in this area?
Sure. So my plans for the foundation in the future is I'm in the process of rebuilding the board. So I'm looking to add new board members. We want to try to, add to our donor base. And there is a crowdfunding site called Patreon in which my dream is to get 25,000 people to sign up there who are willing to become recurring monthly donors at like a $3 level, at $3 level, $5. And so that would allow the foundation to, again, have full-time employees. So I launched the organization. I committed $1.5 million from the compensation that I got so that we could have a full-time staff. But I thought that I could just have a legal staff and that I could meet with donors and they would write checks and everything would be great. But our fundraising didn't go well. And after 3.5 years, I couldn't keep writing a large check every month. So I had to replace the paid employees with volunteers. So I have about 20 volunteers now. But there's a number of lawyers that when we identify a case as a wrongful conviction case and we see a way to win it, we pitch the cases to those lawyers and for them to take the case on pro bono, in which they would continue to consult with us, and the foundation would do strategic media, timely media, and back to courtroom and other stuff in addition to the consultation. So that's how we've been working. And and we have about 11 cases. We have 11 cases that are in progress right now that are in various stages as we work towards exoneration. But the problem, though, is that the lawyers are not independently wealthy, and they have to do their paid cases and do stuff on the side. And so what happens often is that work that could be done in 8 to 10 months winds up taking 3 or 4 years. And I know what that's like to be on the other end of that meeting. So I would like to, again, have in-house staff, in-house attorneys, in-house investigators, in-house paralegals, all the personnel needed to really run a really robust organization. So I know what worked well for us before. I know what areas that need to be improved. I have a better idea of I know now, you can't have one staff attorney, one investigator, and one paralegal and think that you're going to have like a 10 case load. You're stretching them too thin. You really need to have several lawyers, and you need to have a whole team. So that's what I wanted. I want to have in-house staff and keep the volunteers as supplemental and keep the other lawyers who are helping. Let the cases that we don't do ourselves in-house, but that we think are credible. I mean, sending those cases to them is still a better option than for them to just wait on us. But I'd like to be able to have that staff to really go hard at a lot of the cases.
I'll make sure that information is in the show notes. So if I link to your foundation website, I think that links to your crowdfunding, so people can get there. Stepping back, if there truly are 120,000 people in jail who've been falsely convicted, and I think the exonerations are running at about 120 per year, something like that. That's like a 1 out of 1,000.
Yeah, about that.
So obviously, the real solution to this problem is not just what you're doing, which is, for the individuals who are affected, it's a miracle, but it doesn't affect the vast majority of these people. So how does America stop putting so many people in jail falsely?
It's a great question, and I have some great I have what I consider to be some great ideas. So I think videotaping interrogations from beginning to end, having allowing false confession experts to testify, not about
Right.
whether a confession is false or not, but to instead impart contextual information
Mm-hmm.
about what are the factors that have been proven to lead to false confessions, so that the jury or the judge can determine if that's the situation in that
Mm-hmm.
particular case. There are better identification procedures. Having a commission and oversight for prosecutors. I think that criminalizing clear-cut intentional prosecutorial misconduct, removing
Mm-hmm.
immunity so that they could be exposed to lawsuits if they commit clear-cut intentional misconduct.
Mm-hmm.
Having a rule that says that nobody should be convicted only based on an informant, that there should be at least one piece of external evidence that corroborates that. Having a better public defender system. There's an
Mm-hmm.
uneven balance now in terms of the manpower and financial resources. So I think if
Right.
both sides have access to the same funding and personnel and experts, that's a big part of it, and equal pay for both sides. Limiting the caseload. I mean, it's not unusual for one lawyer to represent 100 people at the same time.
Which
So
isn't
that's
impossible. Yeah.
also part of it. Just stop, just ceasing to allow, junk science into the courtroom, stuff that used to be used as evidence, like tire tracks and footprints and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
tire tracks, footprint, bite marks. I mean, even fingerprints where there's not a clear consensus about how many points of match there have to be in order to
Mm-hmm.
constitute a match. That's a big part of preventing this on the front end. We need to have less prejudicial pretrial coverage. I mean, sometimes the media can set the stage for a wrongful conviction to occur. We need to have a better appellate process. So this rubber stamp denying and focusing on proceduralism, and
Mm-hmm.
we need to get past that, and we need to just objectively consider claims.
Okay.
I think that we do need more innocence modifications. And
Right.
maybe the last thing I'll say is, because I won't go on too long, but I think having legitimate, real conviction review units within the district
Yes.
attorney's office, that's
Mm-hmm.
big, like in Brooklyn and New York with 23 people. So having that, but also having like a statewide conviction review unit, because a lot of the units don't work that well. There should be some other way of correcting wrongful convictions. So
Yes.
those are my ideas.
I think those are all great ideas, and I only laugh there because like this is such a mountainous change to the system.
Right.
I think we could have several shows just talking about how to reform the justice system. I think basically people, ordinary citizens need to take this seriously, and instead of
Yes.
where they're voting for justice officials, voting for the guy who promises to, be tough on crime. Like that's the oldest game in the political handbook. What about the guys who are going to be tough on all the people in jail who shouldn't be there, either by, eliminating the criminalization of things that aren't harming anybody, or getting people out of jail who shouldn't be there, either because they were falsely convicted or because they were given an insanely long sentence.
I think it's important that citizens learn about wrongful convictions and stop trying to get out of jury duty. Stop getting out of jury duty. You need people, educated people who know about wrongful conviction. They're going to scrutinize it to serve on juries.
I agree that there are things that ordinary citizens can do, and as you've pointed out, accept jury duty as a duty, donate to an innocence project, and if you're in the position of talking to somebody who's running for office, to ask them what they're going to do about these massive problems that the justice system has.
Sure, but even beyond talking to them, I mean, educating ourselves on what the platform is, and anybody can ask people those questions. You can email their campaign, learn what their positions are on different issues,
Mm-hmm.
and I think just vote for people that are concerned with justice.
Yes, yes, and I think to some extent I've seen signs that there are prosecutors being elected because they're going to deal with some of these issues, because traditionally, the guy who talked the toughest was the guy who got elected.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but we saw Ken Thompson got elected in Brooklyn before he passed. Greg Watkins did in Dallas, and most recently, Larry Krasner in Philadelphia. He ran on a progressive, smart on crime type of plank. So it is doable. I mean, you have to lead the conversation. You have to make your case for being smart on crime and addressing these issues and put it out there and, do it that way. That's better than, staying silent. That's better than selling out your soul just to try to get the position. Remember, it's not supposed to be the position just for the sake of the position. It's supposed to be the position to then make a difference and do something good with it.
Yeah, justice has two sides. It's not just putting people in jail. It's also making sure that the innocent aren't punished unfairly. One final question: if you could recommend somebody else to talk to who represents an under-discussed issue,
Yes.
maybe around,
Yeah.
who would that be?
Yeah, I know exactly who it could be. Yes. All right. H. Bosch Jr. And H. Bosch Jr., the segment that he represents is he's become the voice for the falsely accused but acquitted.
Okay.
So, in other words, unlike me, who was falsely accused but wrongfully convicted and therefore did time in prison, H. Bosch Jr., who was the second, he had money to fight back. He was the owner of the second largest moving company in Albany, and so he was able to spend $200,000 on a really good attorney and to defend himself. And so he was acquitted in the end. But he lost his business, his reputation went in the toilet. There was a psychological strain of not knowing whether or not he was going to, be in prison for the next 30 years. So he doesn't walk away unscathed. So we don't think about people who are acquitted, but who are innocent. So I would recommend him. I want to recommend a couple of other people on different topics. I want to recommend Sean Pica. He's the executive director of Hudson Link, a nonprofit organization that brings college education for prisoners. They have an amazing 2% recidivism rate compared to the 68% national average. I want to recommend Anthony Papa, who is he's kind of like the Jeff Deskovic of drug reform. So Anthony did like 15 years. He's the only person in New York that was both got clemency and then was pardoned. Okay, just that have all to do with Rockefeller drug law. So I recommend him. I recommend Gary Jacobs. I won't say anything else. That's on family law reform. So I won't say any more recommendations.
Oh, well, that's great. I definitely appreciate that because justice issues are something I want to continue to follow. So I would just like to thank you very much, Jeff, for spending this time with me today, and congratulations again on graduating from law school, and best wishes for the success of your foundation in the future, and of course all the people that will mean that you've helped.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity, and I'm happy I got to recommend a few people. There's no shortage of topics to talk about, and I know a lot of the key people. Thank you for your time.
And I will send you a link to the podcast.
I will share it on social media so we can maximize the audience that hears the interview. You were a really good interview. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Jeff.
Okay, bye for now.
Thank you for listening to episode 220 of The Infectious Myth. If you have a comment, a question, or a suggestion for a future guest, please email me at david.crow@theinfectiousmyth.com. Like us at facebook.com/theinfectiousmyth or join the discussion there. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at infectiousmyth. Commit to monthly donations of any amount at patreon.com/infectiousmyth. Until next week, thank you and goodbye.